Abbiamo già in collegamento con noi Manon Aubry, che ringraziamo, siccome c'è la plenaria, non so se a Bruxelles o a Strasburgo, le diamo subito la parola, poi sentirei Michele proprio per partire dalla pace.
Manon, a toi.
Ci sei, Manon?
Hi everyone.
Welcome, grazie, thank you, welcome.
Hi everyone. I hope you are all doing well, and sorry for not being with you all today. In reality, indeed, we're in Brussels, where we're having a big fight against the right, making a union with the far right against some climate policies this week. So it's quite important to be here. But I can say a few words about the fight we're having in France and what it means also for Europe. I can say also that from Strasbourg, sorry, where it was quite funny because there was a big mourning around Berlusconi and there's a ceremony in his memory here in the European Parliament, and I think it seems that everyone forgot who he was, and being dead doesn't make you a better person. So it's also interesting to see the dynamics here in the European Parliament. Anyway, I heard that there was some interest about the French mobilization, and it's been indeed a very intense mobilization that we've had over the last few months, because Macron has wanted to postpone the pension age for 2 years, but he's been doing that in the most brutal way ever, and in reaction to it, we've had one of the, I think, strongest social movement we've ever had in the last decades. And have to say, I'm 33 years old, and it's for sure the biggest social movement I've ever seen. There's been more than 14 big dates of mobilizations with millions of people in the streets. All trade unions were mobilized, and the polls clearly say that more than 2/3 of the French population oppose the reform that Macron is trying to push. And when I say push, it's not even the right word. The right word is impose, because we live in a democracy in France in which our National Assembly has never had the chance nor the opportunity to actually vote on the pension reform in France. And I'm sure this would have happened in Hungary or in Poland, would have for sure and for good reasons complained about violations of the rule of law, etc. But in France, everything seems normal. And this, at the same time that there's no votes in the parliament, Macron has been using brutal police repression to stop the mobilization, doing arbitrary arrests. There's been actual trial for insults, mutilation by police. So he's really using the force in the streets, force in the parliament to really push his law through. And it's interesting to see how the social movement in reaction to that has been reinventing itself. You might have seen we invented a new ways to protest with pan, making noise out of pan. So we call it casserolade in French. And it was interesting because everywhere the government would go, we would welcome them with pans and making noise. That being said, we've been pushing it through to try to translate the win in the street or in the herds of people towards the win in the parliament. But as I said, there's never been any vote. And even, this week we've been trying to table a law to abrogate the pension reform, and even that Macron managed not to have a vote on that. The lessons learned from this social mobilization is that there is room for a strong social mobilization when it is about core social issues. And it's interesting also to see the unity that we've managed to have on the political side. And it's clear that France is now impossible to govern because Macron doesn't have the majority in the parliament, and there are three clear blocks: the NUPES, so the left coalition that was built a year ago, the liberals, and the far right. And it's going to be a fight between the three of us. And it's interesting because we see this type of fight also happening at European level in the times where I think Europe is sort of a crossroads. In a way, liberal policies have failed to deliver in the last few years. In front of the crisis, we've seen that, even the European Union had to suspend the austerity rules, they had to suspend the state aid rules, because it's clear that competition is not the solution, that austerity killed our public hospitals, that free trade made us incapable of producing masks and tests. In a nutshell, I think we are at the end of the era of neoliberalism that has clearly failed. The question is now, what is going to be replaced? And we've won a number of cultural battles, but we haven't won yet some of the key political battles. And I think that is at stake for the next European elections. We've nevertheless, here in the European Parliament, managed to have a few key political wins, like TRIPS waiver for vaccines, for example, a tax on windfall profit. We've been also on the forefront on ethical reform, denouncing practices of corruption and the influence of lobbies and conflict of interest here in the European Parliament. But the question now is, we know that the potential for the next European Parliament is to look like Italy. Sorry, guys, to be talking about Italy is not necessarily as a good model, but what Meloni is doing, which is an alliance of the right wing and the far right, it is what is happening now at the moment in the European Parliament. So there's a big window of opportunity. There's a risk that Europe comes back to business as usual, even worse with the alliance of the right wing and the far right. And this is the reason why we need to propose a strong left alternative to build on the social movements like the one we've had in France, to be one fit into the institution and one fit outside of this institution, supporting the social movement, but also proposing the alternative. And because we know what the right wing and the far right are doing, tomorrow we're voting a very important legislation in the European Parliament, which is the natural restoration law, which is a very important legislation to preserve biodiversity. And the liberals, the right wing and the far right, are uniting their forces to kill the legislation. And this is why we need a strong left to defeat this coalition. But we also need to be able to bring an alternative narrative that talks to the daily lives of people. When public services are being privatized, this is the impact of the European Union. And we need to be able to change the course of the European Union. And this is why we need also to be much stronger for the next European election. The polls are showing a potential increase of our group for the next European election. So I think we can play a key role to have a European Union, an economy that works for the 99% and doesn't work for the 1%. And this is why those conversations among different left forces are so important. So I do hope that also in the next parliament, we will have some Italian members, because we're missing Italian people, but also because the fight that the Italian left is having against the right and the far right is so important, because that trend might be followed by too many countries across the European Union. So that's it for me, because I don't want to be too long, and sorry again not to be there with you in person. But I do hope that next time it will not be a plenary session here in the European Parliament, and I can be with you all.
Grazie moltissimo Manon.